Hello and welcome to another video from Sustenance Uncovered, the only channel you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy. And today's little video is going to be called The Fossil Record. So anyways, everybody that regularly takes the time to watch my videos probably pretty much knows that I have a very strong faith in the Creator and that I often make comments about creation as if it is a proven fact when in fact it isn't. For something to be proven, it must be universally recognized. Many people believe in evolution, so creation is not universally recognized. For something to be a proven fact, it has to be observable by anyone. Creation is not only not observable by us today, but it appears from the Bible that no human has ever witnessed the creation of anything. The only thing reported to have been created after Adam was Eve, and Adam was asleep when that happened. If you believe in something with all your heart, but you're not able to physically show what you believe to another person, you cannot simply proclaim that what you believe is a fact and expect everyone to accept that it is a fact, whether it's a fact or not. No matter how much you believe it or how many people you convince to believe it, until something is observable by anyone who wishes to observe it, at best you can only claim to have a theory. In fact, if what you believe in is in line with what God believes in, the best thing you can claim is that you have a belief. Theories are usually reserved for people that are employed by insanely wealthy industrialists, people under government contract, or people that are backed by one of the more powerful state-sponsored religions. The inference being that theories are reserved for science, whereas beliefs are reserved for make-believe. However, since both words have the exact same definition, you may feel free to use whichever one you wish to describe your faith in your God, be it the Creator or the state. Now that we're all on the same page, I'm going to tell you why I'm making this video. There are two questions that I have been asked more than once by evolutionists. One is, why don't I believe in the fossil record? And the other is, why don't I believe in radiocarbon dating? The inference here is that if you believe in a creator, you cannot possibly believe in the fossil record or radiocarbon dating. That is not true. I believe in both. Fossils are rocks that are shaped like organic things. Sometimes they can form around an organic object, leaving a mirror image, as when fossil footprints are created. Other times, rock replaces organic matter, such as when fossilized bones are created. The reason that I'm explaining this is because I think a lot of folks believe that fossilized bones are created when organic matter turns into rock. Organic objects, such as trees and bones, cannot and will not ever turn into rock. Does any of the original material from the bone remain in the rock? It's very unlikely. But even if some of it did, nobody, no matter how smart or educated or how much scientific equipment they have at their command, would ever be able to separate the atoms that may have been in the original material from the atoms that were introduced by the material that created the fossil. Remember, unless just anybody can observe something, it is not a proven fact. Let's see if what I just said is a proven fact or not. Can just anybody observe that bones are not fossils? Yes. First, there is the weight. Rocks weigh much more than bones. And the scientific law of conservation of matter and energy proves that you cannot get a pound of rock from an ounce of bone. Second, there is the composition. It really is scientifically proven that rocks are not made up of the same material as bones. Bones are pretty much uniform in their composition. In other words, there really isn't much difference in the composition of a chicken bone and a monkey bone. But fossils are made up of all different kinds of things depending on the material that replaced the bone. So I'm not overstepping my established boundaries when I say that fossils are not bones. This is simply a proven fact. Now, what is radiocarbon dating? Radiocarbon dating is a way of telling the age of an object based on the fact that all plants take in carbon from the atmosphere, some of which is a type of carbon that is radioactive. This carbon is fixed at the death of the plant, at which time the plant may be consumed by an animal. All organic things take in radioactive carbon during their lifetime. There is no way around it. And all radioactive elements degrade at a fixed rate over time. In other words, we can tell how old a carbon-14 atom is by how radioactive it is. The rate of decay of a carbon-14 atom is what is known as a constant. Mathematical figures based on constants are always accurate. However, something that cannot be accurately measured is an unknown variable. Why? Because it's unknown. It is recognized by the folks that do radiocarbon dating that carbon-14 levels have not remained constant over the entire history of the Earth. They do not remain constant from location to location. There is nothing to keep old carbon-14 atoms from contaminating a living species, and there is really no way of keeping new carbon-14 atoms from contaminating a very old species. Those in the scientific community who put their faith in evolution say that these discrepancies can be cleared up using simple mathematical formulas to compensate for these variables. That is not true. Math can be used to compensate for fixed, observable variables. However, it is absolutely impossible to create a mathematical formula to compensate for or explain a variable that is unpredictable, random, and unobservable. But if you explain this to them, they say that the discrepancies are not so great as to make that much of a difference. The fact is that one specimen tested at 2 different laboratories will almost always be assigned a different age at each lab. And the differences that we're talking about are not measured in days or weeks or even years, but oftentimes millennia. Millennia means thousands of years. There have been some very well preserved organic objects that we know the age of that have been tested accurately, and a lot of scientists say that these tests prove that radiocarbon dating works. However, since there are really very few objects that can be accurately dated from more than a few hundred years back, there isn't really any way to test the accuracy of objects that are dated out much earlier. How accurate is radiocarbon dating when testing dinosaur bones? We don't know. There are no dated organic objects from that time period that we can use for comparison, and we cannot test dinosaur bones anyways because to date, no one has ever found any dinosaur bones. All that we have are rocks made from some unidentifiable material which replaced the original organic bones. Rocks do not have the same nutritional requirements as dinosaurs and therefore would not have to consume plants containing carbon-14. Radiocarbon dating is not much different from fortune telling, but it's viewed differently, mostly because a deck of tarot cards and one of them gypsy costumes only cost about 50 bucks, if that. Whereas setting up one of them radiocarbon dating businesses costs much more, about $1 zillion more. But that doesn't mean a thing because rich, powerful people have a reputation for buying stupid stuff with other people's money, especially if it somehow adds legitimacy to their claim that they themselves are gods and that there is no God above them. Does the fossil record prove evolution? No. At best, it is evidence of evolution, depending on who you're talking to. Does the fossil record prove creation? No. It's only evidence of creation, and once again, depending on who you are talking to. Does the fossil record prove that there is a government conspiracy to create stone sculptures in the shape of animal bones to trick people into believing in evolution? Once again, no. It is only evidence of a government conspiracy to do such a thing. You see, evidence is subjective, which means that it can be interpreted differently by different people. That's why I say it's evidence, depending on who you're talking to. And as complete as we're told that the fossil record is, it really doesn't contain much information at all. At this time, the only way that we can tell one species from another is through chromosomal differences. This is proven nearly every day as we use chromosomal examination to discover that animals that we long thought were different species are actually the same species. And animals that we thought were the same species are actually very different. And animals that I'm talking about are living, easily viewed animals. So it's quite reasonable for me to assert that rocks that are shaped like the remains of animals and plants are going to be much more difficult to classify than living things. For example, just to get you thinking, if you were to compare the skeleton of a 2-year-old girl from China with the skeleton of a 100-year-old man from Africa, would you be able to prove that the two were of the same species, or would you think that they were two distinct species? Since we're familiar with the life cycle and family differences between members of the human species, we could pretty easily figure it out. But what if you're looking at the skeleton of a 2-year-old female T-Rex from China with a 100-year-old male T-Rex from Africa? No one has ever witnessed the age progression or family differences found within the T-Rex species. Now here's your homework assignment from Sustenance and Covering. Go to Google. Type in something like African-Asian skull comparison or European-Asian skull comparison and examine the differences. Now do the same thing again, only type in Australopithecus Neanderthal skull comparisons or Neanderthal modern skull comparisons, and yes, you will find, that's right, they are different as well. About the same amount of different, in fact. In fact, if you were to go to any cemetery in the world and randomly exhume any two graves, chances are that you would find about the same amount of difference from skull to skull. We are all somewhat different. That's why I'm able to distinguish my wife from my uncle just by using my sense of sight. Without access to an animal's genome, there is absolutely no way to distinguish its species from any other species. All animals have chromosomes. Rocks do not. Fossils are rocks. Now look at the artist renderings of these so-called prehistoric men. Always they have caveman hair, caveman eyebrows, caveman lips, caveman ears, and they're wearing caveman clothes and carrying caveman implements. Just like chromosomes, none of these details is recorded in the fossil record. Now look at the artist renderings and try to imagine all of that caveman stuff going, and use your imagination to put that artist rendering in a button-up, long-sleeve shirt and blue jeans. Guess what? Yes, it's me. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm still a little paranoid about taking off this hat, these sunglasses, and this rather cosmopolitan beard, I would prove it to you. But that ain't gonna happen. Does radiocarbon dating have any use at all? Sure it does. There's no reason to believe that it cannot get you a reasonably close date on a well-preserved organic material that is a couple of 100 years old and at sea level. However, when you consider the cost, it would probably be a whole lot more logical to just take your best guess and be satisfied, because even though there is some evidence that radiocarbon dating can work, there's also some pretty compelling evidence that guessing works as well. Since we don't have proof of either method of dating ancient objects, I just believe it's best to use a method that don't cost too much. What about the fossil record? Does the fossil record prove anything? Well, if you're like me and believe in the fossil record, yes, it does. It proves just what I've been saying all along. The planet is dying. But you don't need the fossil record for that. Just in our lifetime, humans have witnessed firsthand the extinction of millions of species. Of course, if you're a scientist with a government job that you want to keep the figures more like, I don't know, maybe 11 or something. However, if you're a realist, the figure is probably somewhere in between. The extinction of many of the planet's living things is a proven fact. It can be observed by anyone. We really can't tell from the fossil record how many species have gone extinct because, as I said earlier, rocks don't have chromosomes, but it is pretty obvious that some of those things that are in the fossil record are different species. In other words, there's really no reason to believe that the T-Rex was just a different variety of elephant. I think it's a proven fact because, as I said, our criteria for stating that something is a proven fact is that what you believe in can be observed by anyone. And I'm pretty sure anyone should be able to tell a fossilized elephant from a fossilized T-Rex. What does the fossil record prove about humans? It proves that human beings look different from one another. But we don't need the fossil record to prove that either. We can observe that today. All humans do not look the same. That is a proven fact. Anyone that wishes can observe that people look different from one another. It's also true that family members will often resemble one another. The resemblance between my dad, my brother, and myself is much more obvious than my resemblance to, say, someone like Kim Jong-il. This ain't the first time that I tried something like this. I have no doubt that evolutionists will continue to mix up and misuse the words proof and evidence. There's also no doubt that they will continue to do the same thing with the words fact, theory, and belief. Years ago, I tried to explain the difference between these words to parents, and yet to this day, they continue to tell their kids that some missing cookies and gifts under the tree prove that there is a Santa Claus. Missing cookies and gifts under the tree are only evidence that there is a Santa Claus. And once again, even that depends on who you're talking to. If you're told that the fossil record and carbon-14 dating proves evolution and you bought into it, you've been had. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.